coordinate grid and all the things that go along with it, which I guess is a lot. But a lot of this I think should be review, so we'll kind of move through it quickly. If you need to go back and watch it again, feel free to do that. So first of all, a coordinate grid is just the intersection of two straight lines at a perpendicular angle. So they made it a right angle right here in the middle. And where they meet is the point 0, 0, and we call that an origin. To the right, on the x-axis, is all the positive numbers, and to the left is the negative numbers. And up on the y-axis is the positives, and down is the negatives. So I've highlighted the positives in yellow and the negatives in green. So this divides the plane into 4 quadrants. We start in the top right with quadrant 1, and we move around counterclockwise with 2, 3, and 4. We kind of label this top right one quadrant 1 because that's where we deal with positive numbers. So this is kind of where we work the most, is in this first quadrant with positive and positive. And on second quadrant, the x is negative, but the y is positive. See how the x is over here negative, but the y is over here positive. In the third quadrant, both the x's and the y's are negative. And in the fourth quadrant, the x is positive, but the y is negative. So whenever you look at a point, you can immediately know what quadrant it's in by just looking at its signs. The x-axis are points where the y is 0. So it would have something like, it would have an x number and then come a 0 on the x-axis. And on the y-axis, be where the x is 0, so it would be 0, comma, then some y number. And the x-axis also is where we put the independent variables, and the y-axis is where we put the dependent variables. And we'll talk about that in a couple slides, so just bear with me on that. And then just, of course, remember that any point on the plane is defined by what we call an ordered pair, meaning the order does matter, and then it's a pair, so there's 2 numbers, an x number and a y number. Alright, so let's go with this. Let's graph and label each ordered pair and describe its location. So let's first off start off by just graphing these points A, B, C, and D. I'm going to do that in blue. So the point A is where x is 3, x is 3, and y is 2. So I'm looking over here on my x-axis. X is 3 is right here, so anywhere along this line. And then where y is equal to 2, I notice is right there. So we're kind of anywhere along this line. So I'm looking at the point where those 2 lines intersect, at that point right there. And this is going to be the point A. So to graph and label, to graph is to put that dot right there, to label is to put the A next to it. B is at -1, which would be left 1 on the x-axis, and then up 4. So right here, that's point B. Point C, notice the x is 0, and the y is at -2, so that's going to be the point right here, where x is 0 and y is -2, that's the point C. And the point D is 5, 0, so it means x is 5 and y is 0, so it's going to be right here on the x-axis. That's the point D. Now let's go and just kind of say where they're at. That's what it says by describe its location. So A, I'd say, is in quadrant 1. I'm just going to say in quad 1. Point B, notice that's in quadrant 2. So I'm going to say in quadrant 2. Point C is on the y-axis. So we could just say on y-axis, but I'm going to be even more specific, and it's down at the negative, in the negative area. So I'm going to say on negative y-axis. And D is on the x-axis and where the numbers are positive. So I'm going to say on positive x-axis. Okay? So that's kind of those first part, A, B, C, and D. Now the next part says, give the coordinates of each point graphed. So let's look here at point A, B, C, D, E. Let's look at E. Notice it's right here what we call the origin. The x is 0 and the y is 0. So the coordinates of E is a point 0, 0. Let's find the coordinate of F. Well, we always start with our x, so notice it is underneath the -6, and then it's to the left of -2. So then it's going to be the x is -6, and the y is -2. Let's look at point G. G, x is underneath the 5, and to the right of -6. So the x is 5, the y is -6. And the last point, H, the x is at -3. If you look, it's there above the -3. And, well, what is the y? So H is right here above the -3, that's the x, but what about the y? It's not on the 1, it's not on the 2, it's kind of halfway in between. And on this we have to estimate, unless, it gives us points of like halfway in between, but we'll just estimate this to be 1.5, because it looks pretty close to halfway in between there. So I'm going to say 1.5. 1.5 is where H is at. Notice it also does say to describe its location. To describe its location. So we'll do that here. The point E is at the origin. F is in the third quadrant. We'll use Roman numerals. G is in the fourth. Oh, sorry. F is not in the fourth quadrant. F is in the third quadrant. I apologize for that. G is in the fourth quadrant. And then H is in the second quadrant. And I don't want to predict the future or anything, but I could almost promise you that you'll have questions like this on your quiz. Just saying. Alright, let's talk about independent and dependent variables, as I promised I would talk about. Independent variables are variables whose values can be chosen, and they're also called the input. Think about what it means to be independent. You're going to be free and independent. It means that you can make whatever decisions you want. Whenever the older you get, the more independent you become. You're able to make more and more choices on your own. When you're a little kid, your parents say, go to bed this time, eat your vegetables, things like that. The older you get, the more dependent you become. The more independent you become, and the more you're able to make your own decisions. So a dependent variable are variables whose value is determined by the input value. So you pick something up here, and then that determines what this is. Also called the output. And so, like, whenever you're dependent, that means you require someone else to provide for you. Like babies are require their parents to give them food. They're dependent on their parents. So it's kind of a basic idea. Let's see if we can identify these, which is which. It says the distance traveled and the amount of gas used. So one of these is independent, one of them is dependent. So let's try to find the independent one. Which one of these can we choose? Well, I can choose how far I go, right? So, but I can't necessarily just choose how much gas my car is going to use. I can only choose how far I'm going to drive it, and the car chooses how much gas is used. So my independent is going to be the distance traveled my dependent is my amount of gas. I guess the amount of gas used. Because I can choose how far I want to drive, and then however far I choose to drive will determine how much gas I have to use. Part B here says the water bill and the gallons of water used. So I'm going to have an independent and dependent. So let's think about, can I choose how much my water bill is, or can I choose how much water I use? Well, I can choose how much water I use. I wish I could pick how much my bill is, and I can kind of, right? If I choose to use less water, then my water bill will be less. My water bill depends on how much water I use. So that means my independent will be water used, and my dependent will be the water bill, or how much my water bill is. Alright, the last thing we want to talk about is actually a little bit of functions, but we're classifying them here as like an independent and dependent variable. So here my x is my input, or my independent variable, and my y is my output, or my dependent variable. So it says complete the table, so this one over here on the right, for the equation y is equal to 3x minus 4. So since the x is my independent, it can kind of choose to be whatever it wants. The book has told us pick these values here that we have listed to be the ones that you pick. And I'm supposed to find the y that corresponds to that. So let's just go ahead and see if we can do that real quick. We're going to have y is equal to 3x, and I'm just going to put parentheses right here where I want my x, minus 4. Why I put parentheses there is, instead of plugging in x, I'm going to plug in a number for x. So I'm going to plug in -1 in right there, and then find out what y corresponds to that. So I'm going to plug in -1. Now I want to simplify this out. This is going to give me y is equal to -3 minus 4. They have the same sign, so I add them. That means my y is going to equal to -7. So whenever I plug in a -1 as my input, my output is a -7 when I'm using this equation. Now let's do the same thing, but with 0. Y is equal to 3 times 0 minus 4. Well, that makes it fairly easy because 3 times 0 is just 0 minus 4, and 0 minus 4 is simply -4. So that output value is going to be -4. So when I put in 0, I get out 4. Well, let's try that now with 2. I'm going to say y is equal to 3 times 2. Again, I'm plugging that 2 in for the x, minus 4. And again, I'm just following this equation the same every time, except for instead of x, I'm using these numbers that they gave me. So let's see here. This is going to be y is equal, 3 times 2 is 6, minus 4, different sign, so I subtract. Y is equal to 2. And then one more here. I'm going to have y is equal to 3 times 1/3 minus 4. Well, 3 times 1/3, if we're going to do a little thought bubble here, that's 3 over 1 times 1 over 3, which is 3 over 3, which is equal to just 1. So I have y is equal to 1 minus 4. 1 minus 4, opposite sign, so I subtract 3, but the 4 is the negative, is the bigger one, so I'm going to say -3. And there I have completed my table for the output values that correspond to each input value for the given equation.